The Gerald R. Supercarrier is the biggest vessel in naval history. It's 100,000 tons of solid steel, top-heavy, carrying over 5,000 sailors and nearly 100 aircraft. It can sail anywhere in the world, protecting American assets in the roughest and most ridiculous conditions, never faltering, never toppling over, and keeping everyone safe. But how does such an enormous fortress keep its buoyancy? Crashing through waves and hurricane-like storms while never faltering. Why do sailors feel so safe on this upside-down pyramid? Spending months at sea, trusting it will keep them safe. The stakes are always high. Billions of dollars are on the line. And once again, American ingenuity and engineering come to the forefront. This is what happens when the world's largest aircraft carrier is rocked by a deadly storm. And if you are proud of our brave sailors, type "proud" in the comments section below. The Archimedes principle and center of gravity. At the core of any carrier's stability is the science of buoyancy. But to understand this, we need to go back to the ancient Greek thinker Archimedes and his principle. According to the great thinker, an object floats if the buoyant force, or upward force exerted by fluid, is equal to the object's weight. On an aircraft carrier, this force isn't just a small push, but an immensely distributed upward force created by the sheer volume of water displaced by the massive hull. Because the hull is primarily hollow steel, its average density is far less than that of the water it sits in. This ensures that when the vessel is in the ocean, it doesn't sink, but remains in a floating state that ensures everyone on board is kept safe. Now, it's the importance of stability, which ensures the ship doesn't capsize when facing rough seas or harsh conditions. Stability in a ship isn't just a given, but determined by the relationship between two crucial points: the center of gravity and center of buoyancy. The best way to explain the center of gravity is to think of the single point where the ship's entire weight is concentrated. But naval architects and engineers put in a lot of work to keep the center of gravity as low as humanly possible. You can think of a Weeble toy, which wobbles but doesn't fall down because its weight is concentrated at the base. Heavy naval carriers work by using the same principle, placing the heaviest components at the lowest levels, like the nuclear reactors, engines, fuel, and the steel keel that runs the length of the ship. Dense ammunition, such as missiles, is also found in compartments at the lower levels of the carrier, while aircraft are usually lowered to the middle to ensure more ballast. Essentially, it creates an invisible ballast, which anchors the ship to the water. But this doesn't work without the center of buoyancy. The center of buoyancy is the center of the volume of water the ship displaces. When the ship is sitting level, the centers of gravity and buoyancy are aligned vertically. But here's the key: when waves smash into the hull and the carrier rolls or tips to one side, the shape of the hull changes, while the center of buoyancy shifts to the side of the tip. This shift creates a righting arm, or level, that pulls the ship back toward the vertical. It is a massive shifting arm, specifically designed to ensure the ship doesn't capsize, regardless of the enormity of the storm. For large carriers, such as the Nimitz or Gerald R. class, the center of buoyancy is much higher than the center of gravity. Essentially, it is impossible for the vessel to capsize when in a natural state. But this is just the beginning, and it gets even more interesting to examine the structural design of these vessels. The hull's secret shape. One of the most notable features on any carrier is the shape of the hull. It is usually fine, almost like the blade of a knife. The idea is to cut through the water by reducing drag and pitching motion. This not only increases the speed of the vessel, but also makes it more efficient when moving. The real secret to the hull isn't observable, and for this, you need to dive beneath the waves. Thanks to dry docking, we can clearly see the hull and how much ingenuity went into creating it. Carriers have massive, broad, and nearly flat-bottom designs that make the hull seem much wider than you'd imagine when observing it from a distance. The wide hull is a fundamental part of stability. To put this into perspective, the Nimitz-class carriers have a hull of nearly 250 feet wide at its flight deck, while the beam at the waterline is over 130 feet. This offers a lot of width below the water, which is critical for maintaining stability. Thanks to this, the riding force is maximized, and when it tips to one side, it is almost like a seesaw, where weight is added to the other side to pull it back upright. The flat submerged hull needs to be heavy to push tremendous amounts of water out of the way on the low side and generate a powerful counterforce to keep it from tipping over. But if you never get to see a carrier in a dry dock, you might be missing another crucial part of the design, the bulbous bow. It might look unusual, with a large protruding bulb-like structure at the front, but it is sitting below the waterline. Yet, it is a fundamental design in hydrodynamics that keeps these vessels afloat. It isn't rocket science, but the fundamental purpose of the bulbous bow is to generate its own wave pattern. It interferes with the carrier's natural bow wave, essentially canceling it out, while reducing the ship's drag and further helping it to be faster and more efficient. In rough seas, this piece of engineering is fundamental to ensure that, unlike a speedboat, the carrier slices through the waves instead of bobbing over them, making the journey more comfortable for the crew while keeping the flight deck stable enough to ensure flight operations can continue. Now, I bet you've already begun thinking about the large superstructure sticking out like a sore thumb that is placed on the starboard side. Well, this is the command tower, but judging by its design, you might think that it will permanently leave the ship unbalanced, but it doesn't. Naval architects have covered, and what you will notice when viewing a carrier from the top is that the flight deck is much wider on the port side. Essentially, it balances the weight of the ship and ensures that no one side is heavier than the other. Despite the command tower's design, it doesn't have a lot of weight, only housing radar and communication equipment. So if you've been wondering if the bridge is where the captain lives, you'd be wrong. He actually lives below the deck with the rest of the crew, but has a large compartment or two for himself. Other heavy machinery and critical components are below deck to ensure the center of gravity remains undisturbed. The slight asymmetry you see on the deck is perfectly balanced by the internal engineering. But has there been a case of a carrier ever capsizing? The history of capsizing carriers. To date, there is no evidence supporting a claim that a United States aircraft carrier has ever been sunk by bad weather. Carriers, such as the USS Lexington, CV-2, did sink, but this was due to being struck by Japanese torpedoes during the Second World War, and not by the elements themselves. The vessel that first comes to mind is the SS El Faro, which set sail from Jacksonville, Florida on September 29, 2015. It was en route to San Juan, Puerto Rico, a routine yet vital run carrying containers and a full load of vehicles, but it never reached its destination. Led by Captain Michael Davidson, its path involved passing through Tropical Storm Joaquin, which was still churning hundreds of miles away, trusting his equipment, which charted a path that would allow him to safely pass south of the worst effects. The crew and its captain set off. Life was normal on the first day, as the 40-year-old streamer thumped through the waves. But as it approached Hurricane Joaquin, the storm had grown to a Category 4 hurricane, stopping and changing course as it drifted southwest. On the bridge, the second and third mates grew increasingly alarmed, urging a southerly course change to hug the Cuban coast, a move that would provide the shelter they desperately needed. By the early morning of October 1st, the El Faro had sailed directly into the maelstrom. Hurricane Joaquin was now a monstrous Category 4 storm. Then, by 7:39 a.m., after a few frantic messages to shore, the communication ended and the ship was gone. Fearing that it might have been hijacked, search crews deployed, but after finding a few life rafts, they realized the crew had been consumed by the hurricane, and only a field of debris remained scattered. The wreckage was found nearly 3 miles down on the ocean floor, a bridge separated from the hull, a testament to the power of the storm. Now, before you say that an aircraft carrier is nothing like a cargo ship, it is important to know that the largest cargo ship is bigger than the largest carrier by a lot. And since the sinking was determined to be an internal leak, it did spark some new life into ensuring a carrier doesn't have to deal with this during a storm. Internal fortifications and damage control. Now that we have established that the design prevents capsizing, it is also important to look at how the vessel is protected from large waves and internal issues. And this is where the internal engineering and strict operational procedures come into play. Despite the hull being a hollow shell, the complexity of it on the inside is extremely fascinating. It doesn't just have a wide open space, but watertight compartments. The hull is basically divided into bulkheads and decks into the hundreds, each with its own sealed space. It is the ultimate defense against flooding. But how exactly does it work? Let's look at what happens when a carrier sustains damage. If a large wave crashes into the hull and creates a minor leak, the flooding is compartmentalized. The water will flow inside 1 or 2 spaces, which are then sealed off, preventing the rest of the hull from facing the extra weight. Unlike the movies, where the water quickly floods the whole ship. Reality is a little different today, especially when you talk about a $13 billion warship. In fact, the buoyancy we discussed earlier is so inherent that even if multiple compartments are flooded, the vessel still remains afloat. But what about water from waves crashing on the deck? Well, the distance between the waterline and the flight deck, often known as the freeboard, is just as massive. This means the flight deck sits about 60 feet out of the water and provides another line of defense against crashing waves. But not everything is saved by design. Sometimes the crew also needs to kick into action to make sure they prevent anything severe from happening. For example, if a heavy storm is inbound, the crew immediately jumps into prescribed action. This is known as damage control protocols. They will secure every hatch and scuttle, effectively sealing the ship like a submarine. Non-essential equipment is tied down in the flight deck, but the most important is the aircraft, which also costs hundreds of millions of dollars. As standard procedure, these aircraft are moved below the deck into a lower hangar bay. Large elevators make this job easier, while up to 18 chains will keep the aircraft in place and prevent it from moving around below deck. Anything left on the flight deck will likely be lost overboard, much like the FA-18 Super Hornet that was famously lost on April 28, 2025, in what is known as the $60 million roll. This time, it wasn't a storm, but crew negligence, when the USS Harry S. Truman was making evasive maneuvers to avoid incoming fire. Instead of strapping it down, it was towed to reposition under the hangar bay, which forced the aircraft to slide off the flight deck and into the ocean. $60 million gone in just a couple of seconds. To ensure this doesn't happen again, the crew is constantly trained for stability, using what is called internal ballasting. This process involves moving water from one set of tanks to another, dewatering or counterflooding, as they call it. It helps to correct the ship's angle and bring it back level. Even though it is still a manual process, we might see it all turning electronic in future versions of these carriers. Avoiding the worst. Despite all the physics, there is one truly essential way that carriers avoid tipping over: planning. With all the physical technology, the United States Navy also has the world's most advanced oceanographic and meteorological capabilities in the world. They don't simply hop on the vessel and blindly sail into a storm. Weather routing is a critical part of round-the-clock operations. The naval meteorologists will use satellite data, buoys, and advanced computer models to track storms, much like you see on the news. They can estimate wave heights and predict the sea states days or even weeks in advance. When the carrier's captain communicates with the navigator, they more than likely plot a course that will avoid major storms or hurricanes, diverting the ship into safer waters. But if a storm is unavoidable, the ship has one final defense: its enormous nuclear reactors, with up to 260,000 shaft horsepower, can kick into action. The captain will do his best to steer the carrier into the storm, with the bow turning the brunt of the waves. If the waves come from the side, it could violently rock the vessel and cause some of the most dangerous rolling, while adding even more stress to the hull. By steering the ship, it creates a manageable pitching motion with a nose-up, nose-down movement. But how much of this does the crew feel? And are they flying around inside? The crew. So far, we have found that the large size and weight of the hull dramatically dampens the motion of the waves and ensures that it doesn't bob around too violently. This already means that the sailors won't feel the dramatic pitching and rolling that are common in smaller ships. For the majority of the crew working deep within the hull, a strong storm might feel like a period of sustained, heavy swaying and rumbling. But while the effects are dampened, it remains noticeable, especially in other parts of the vessel. Those operating in the lower decks will have the least movement. Only a loud and deep rumbling as the bow repeatedly crashes into the waves. Many consider this to be the safest place. On the upper deck, especially the island and the ends of the flight deck, it will be more pronounced. You see the deck moving violently in a pronounced motion. The crew can easily become seasick due to the heave and sway of the motion. It is also the most likely section where sailors could be lost if they fall overboard. And guess what? Finding a sailor who went overboard in a storm is an impossible task. The bunks are usually in the middle, and while the crew will feel the motion, it will depend on the storm's overall intensity. But from the data released by the Navy, storms such as a full hurricane will make it almost impossible to walk straight, with orders often being given to brace themselves on the railing or the long interior passageways. Many might even see these flexible passageways flex with the motions of the ocean. Personnel are instructed to use extreme caution. Avoid going on the open decks unless absolutely necessary for the safety of the ship, and hold railings when moving throughout the vessel. So, even though the design of an aircraft carrier might not make sense for someone viewing from the outside, it is one of the safest places to be at sea, especially during a storm. This doesn't even begin to touch on some of the other vessels which make up a carrier strike group, since these vessels never travel alone. The modern U.S. aircraft carrier is truly one of the greatest engineering feats of the modern world. Not only can it carry a devastating air wing, but it is also designed to be a virtually unsinkable platform in the face of nature's most violent fury. But living on a carrier is another massive problem that needs to be taken into consideration. It might feel like one of the longest and worst journeys ever, but many of these sailors eat better than the standard American citizen. Check out this video to find out why.